AITAH for telling my sister-in-law that I've had 4 miscarriages when she said I didn't understand her loss? It's strange, really, how the journey to becoming a parent changes you. When I look at my daughter now, all 1-year-old curiosity and that wide, infectious smile, I feel like I've finally arrived somewhere I fought so hard to reach. But it wasn't an easy road, not even close, and, honestly, it's not a story I tell often. In fact, it's barely a story I tell at all. 4 miscarriages, 4, even saying that number out loud feels like a weight pressing on my chest. I remember each one. The first, which was the worst, because I didn't see it coming. The second, when I thought, okay, surely that was just bad luck, only to be wrong. The third, which almost broke me because by then I'd started to lose faith. To feel like I was cursed or just not meant to be a mom. And then the fourth, when I almost gave up entirely. Each one hurt in ways I don't have words for. A pain so silent and so deeply personal that I didn't even know how to share it. Not with anyone other than my husband. My rock through it all. For years, it felt like I was trying to reach this elusive goal. Like I'd been given a taste of motherhood only to have it pulled away. And as much as I longed to share what I was going through, I kept it private. I couldn't stand the pity in people's eyes. The awkward, well-meaning comments that seemed to make it hurt even more. So, I kept my losses to myself. Burying them deep. Only a handful of people know, my husband, my parents, and my 2 older sisters. Not even my husband's family, who are wonderful people, know anything about what I went through. When I finally gave birth to my daughter, that moment was nothing short of a miracle. I'm not the type to throw that word around, but that's how it felt, miraculous. After years of grief and loss, I was holding my healthy, happy baby in my arms, and everything I'd gone through melted away in her tiny, perfect smile. She became my whole world, and I felt this overwhelming gratitude for her every day. But even then, I didn't feel the need to talk about what came before. It was like a closed chapter, one I was ready to lock away and move past. To anyone looking in from the outside, I'm just a mom to a 1-year-old girl, living a life that probably looks simple, maybe even charmed. They don't see the years of heartbreak, the nights spent praying for answers, or the times I'd stared at ultrasound screens with a heart pounding full of dread. And, honestly, that's how I've wanted it. I wanted to leave those memories behind, to embrace the present without letting the ghosts of the past define me or my role as a mother. But it's not always that easy, especially when it comes to family. My husband's family has always been wonderful to me, especially his younger sister, my sister-in-law. She's kind, loving, and supportive, and I think, in many ways, she reminds me of myself a few years back. She's been trying for a baby with her husband for a while now. And recently, she shared the devastating news that she'd lost her pregnancy, a miscarriage just a month after they'd announced the news to everyone. My heart broke for her. I know that pain better than anyone. Even though I hadn't told her that. From the start, she's been open about her grief, sharing on social media, bringing it up at family gatherings. And honestly, I admire her for it. I never had that kind of openness. I didn't want people to know what I was going through, so I kept it hidden. Maybe because I didn't want my sadness to be something others could comment on or pity. But my sister-in-law? She seemed to need that sharing, like it helped her process what she was going through. And I wanted to be there for her, even if she didn't know my own story. I reached out, listened to her, offered what comfort I could. I wanted her to know she wasn't alone, even if I couldn't bring myself to say how much I truly understood. But it hasn't been easy, balancing my own happiness with my empathy for her pain. When she talks about her loss, I feel my own resurfacing in unexpected ways. I want to be supportive, to be the comforting sister-in-law she needs. But a part of me, the private part that's buried years of grief, struggles with how much she shares, how she lets her sadness spill out so freely. It's hard to watch, not because of her, but because of what it stirs up in me. So here I am, walking this tightrope, trying to be the good sister-in-law, the supportive friend, while managing my own memories. I've always thought of grief as a solitary thing, something best handled alone, but watching her navigate it in her own way has shown me how different our journeys have been. I just never expected our paths to cross so painfully, or that I'd be forced to confront my own grief in a way I wasn't ready for. And, honestly, I never could have predicted just how messy things would get. When my sister-in-law shared her pregnancy news, I remember feeling genuinely happy for her. She and her husband had been trying for a while, and I could see how much this meant to her. It's a special kind of joy, seeing someone you care about reach that next chapter in their life. Especially when you know how much they've wanted it. And I was thrilled for her. Genuinely, I thought about sharing a bit of my own past with her. Maybe opening up about the losses I'd been through, just to connect on a deeper level. But I held back. This was her moment. It wasn't about me. But just a month after she'd shared the news, she miscarried. The family felt it like a punch to the gut. Everyone had been so excited. And her grief, it was raw and present, spilling out in waves. She put it out there, openly, on social media, and at family gatherings, sometimes in conversations I hadn't even expected to revolve around loss. I've always been pretty private, so watching her go through it so publicly was challenging. But I wasn't about to let that stop me from supporting her. I sent her a message immediately after I heard the news. offering my condolences. "I'm so sorry," I told her. "If you need anything at all, I'm here." It felt like such a small thing to say, considering what she was going through. I knew better than most that words could barely touch that kind of grief. But she responded right away, thanking me and saying how much it meant to her to have support around her. Over the next few weeks, I'd reach out whenever I thought of her, asking how she was holding up and letting her know that I was here to listen. When we'd see each other at family dinners or gatherings, she'd often bring it up, sometimes when I least expected it. At first, I thought maybe she was searching for a way to feel connected, to share her pain in a way that might lighten it a little. I'd nod, offer a kind word, try to be a soft place for her to land. She'd talk about how unfair it felt, how empty she felt going back home to a house she'd imagined filling with baby clothes and toys. And each time, I'd feel this old ache resurface, an echo of my own heartbreak. It was challenging, more than I expected. Hearing her talk about her loss reminded me of my own pain. My own miscarriages that I'd never fully let myself process in the same open way. I'd never had the strength to be that open, to share the darkest parts of my story. It was all a little too close, too personal, and I'd always thought grief was something best kept private. Watching her be so vocal about it was jarring, to say the least. But I pushed those feelings down, convincing myself that this was her moment, her grief, her process. I didn't want to make it about me or add my own experiences to the mix. Even though I felt the weight of them every time she spoke, I thought I was doing the right thing, letting her feel what she needed to feel, letting her process her way. I'd tell myself, she needs this, and remind myself that her loss was fresh, raw, still bleeding. She deserved to feel supported without my own pain shadowing hers. Yet as much as I tried to be there for her, there were times when it got complicated, when it felt almost impossible to separate her grief from my own. She'd talk about how no one could understand the pain she was going through, how isolated and unique her suffering felt. She'd say things like, "I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy," and every time, I'd want to nod along, to say, "I get it, I do," but I'd bite my tongue, holding back, choosing silence instead. It wasn't that I felt resentful or bitter about her sharing her pain. I genuinely sympathized with her. It was more that, in hearing her story over and over, I kept bumping into my own, forced to revisit emotions I thought I'd buried. And that tension, between wanting to support her and wanting to protect myself, kept building. A quiet storm brewing inside me that I hoped would eventually pass. I wondered if I should tell her about my own losses, if maybe hearing that someone close to her had gone through something similar would give her a sense of comfort. But then I'd backtrack, feeling selfish for even considering it. This wasn't the time to make it about me. I reminded myself, she was grieving, she needed someone to listen, not to add their own pain to the pile. But deep down, I felt the weight of my silence. Each time I comforted her, listened to her stories of grief, and held back my own, I felt that silence growing, like it was pushing up against me, demanding to be acknowledged. I thought I was handling it well enough, keeping things private and supporting her from the sidelines. But in reality, I was starting to feel overwhelmed, and I didn't know how much longer I could hold it all in. It all came to a head at one of our family dinners. My husband and I had brought our daughter, who was in one of those bubbly, giggly moods that kids get when they're the center of attention. She'd just learned a few new words, and she was happily babbling, looking around at everyone like they were her adoring audience. I didn't think much of it, just a typical family gathering with a toddler at the center. But I could feel a tension in the air that I couldn't quite place. My sister-in-law was there, quieter than usual, clearly still carrying the weight of her loss. I watched her, the way she kept glancing at my daughter with this sad look in her eyes. Like every laugh, every little sound my daughter made was somehow a reminder of what she'd lost. I could see it in her face, that struggle between wanting to be happy for her niece and feeling the pang of her own grief. I tried to focus on keeping my daughter entertained, hoping to avoid making her pain any harder than it already was. At one point, my sister-in-law began to talk about her miscarriage again, recounting the details, the way it felt to go back to a home she'd imagined filling with a baby. She talked about the little onesies she'd bought, now tucked away in a drawer, and how she couldn't bring herself to look at them anymore. Her words hung heavy in the room, everyone nodding sympathetically, and I felt my own familiar ache starting to surface. But I pushed it down, like always, focusing instead on making sure my daughter didn't disrupt the conversation. Then, right in the middle of my sister-in-law's story, my daughter looked over at her aunt, noticed her sad face, and tried to reach out, stretching her little hand toward her. My daughter loves giving kisses, especially when she senses someone's upset. It's like her own way of trying to fix things, even though she doesn't understand what's going on. So, I leaned in and said softly, "I think she wants to give you a kiss." But my sister-in-law's response was immediate, and harsher than I'd expected. "No," she said sharply, her tone slicing through the quiet room. My daughter froze, wide-eyed, looking up at me, confused and hurt. I felt a pang of protective instinct flare up. My daughter didn't understand rejection. Not like that. She was just trying to help in her own innocent way. And to see her shut down so quickly, it hurt. My husband shifted uncomfortably beside me, clearly sensing the same tension. He whispered to me that my sister-in-law's reaction was uncalled for. And I could tell he was irritated. I tried to shrug it off, telling myself that she was still grieving, that maybe seeing a child's innocence was just too much for her right now. But part of me couldn't help but feel a little bruised by it. My daughter wasn't a reminder of pain, she was a person. A little girl with her own sweet intentions. And seeing her dismissed like that stung more than I wanted to admit. Then my sister-in-law said something that hit me like a punch in the gut. She looked at me and my husband, her eyes glossy with unshed tears, and said, "It's just hard, you know, seeing you both so happy, with your perfect little family, while my child is gone. I love my niece, really I do, but I don't have that, I may never have that." The words landed heavy, like stones in my chest. I felt my husband tense beside me, and I knew he was feeling the same mix of discomfort and hurt. I tried to keep my face neutral, to not let the sting of her words show, but it was harder than I'd expected. I'd lost, too. I knew exactly how she felt, how it felt to love a child so much. Only to have that love end up wrapped in grief. But I'd never, not once, looked at my niece or nephew and felt anger or resentment. My heart had only ever swelled with joy for them. I couldn't understand looking at my daughter and feeling anything but love. No matter the pain that came before. It was like I was seeing a side of my sister-in-law I'd never seen before. A side that was struggling to handle someone else's joy without letting it tear open her own wounds. And then, as if sensing the silence, she looked directly at me and added, "I don't think you understand. You've never lost a child." It was like she'd struck a match in a room filled with gasoline. I felt a surge of emotions rise up, a mix of pain, anger, and disbelief. I'd sat there quietly, letting her have her space, biting my tongue as she poured out her grief, even while knowing that every word was like pulling a scab off my own scars. And now, to hear her tell me I couldn't possibly understand? I looked down at my daughter, still sitting innocently on my lap, and felt the weight of all those unspoken years pressing down on me. I wanted to scream, to tell her that I'd been through hell and back to get to this moment. To sit here with my child on my lap. But at the same time, I knew her grief was fresh, raw, and it wasn't my place to take that away from her. Still, the comment hung in the air, lingering like smoke after a fire. My own pain and silence had been simmering for so long, and in that moment, I felt it bubble up to the surface, threatening to spill over. Her words hung in the air, sharp and stinging, settling over me like a thick, suffocating blanket. "You don't understand." It was such a simple sentence, so quick and easy to say, but it pierced right through me. I felt every buried emotion, every scar, every tear I'd held back for so many years start to bubble up. Fighting to break free, I looked down at my daughter, her wide eyes staring up at me, utterly unaware of the tension surrounding her. She had no idea of the pain woven into her story or the years of longing. The countless doctor's appointments, and the long nights spent clinging to the hope that she might one day be in my arms. She was a miracle to me, my living, breathing miracle, but in this moment, she was also a reminder of all the heartbreak it had taken to bring her here. I glanced over at my husband, and I could tell he felt it too, that mixture of frustration and hurt. That feeling of being dismissed in a way that felt almost personal. I'd spent years trying to be happy for others, even in the face of my own grief. I'd watched friends and family members announce pregnancies, attend baby showers, share in those joyful moments I so desperately wanted, and I'd never let it twist my heart. I'd stayed quiet, congratulated them, sent gifts with a smile, never letting on that I was hurting. And now, here I was, feeling like my own joy was somehow an affront to her grief. I tried to keep it in. I tried to swallow the words that were forming, telling myself that her pain was fresh, that she wasn't thinking clearly, that she didn't mean to hurt me. But then she looked back at me, and I saw something in her eyes, a hint of resentment. Maybe, or anger, that pushed me over the edge. I couldn't stay silent any longer. I couldn't keep pretending that her grief somehow canceled out my own. That I was obligated to bear it alone while she was allowed to share hers freely. Without even thinking, I blurted it out. "Actually, I do understand. More than you know." The words came out soft, barely a whisper, but they silenced the room. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, my mother-in-law's concerned glance, my husband's supportive nod, and my sister-in-law's stunned expression as she processed what I'd just said. "I've had 4 miscarriages," I continued, my voice steadier now, stronger. 4. Before I had my daughter. I went through years of trying, of hoping, of losing. So when you say I don't understand, trust me, I do. I looked down, feeling the weight of those words, feeling the release of years of unspoken pain. For the first time, I'd said it out loud to people outside my immediate circle, people who'd had no idea of the battles I'd fought to get here. The silence that followed was heavy. My sister-in-law looked at me, her face frozen in a mixture of shock and something that looked like guilt. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. My mother-in-law reached over and put her hand on mine, her eyes welling up with tears. "Oh, honey, I had no idea," she whispered, pulling me into a gentle hug. Her warmth, her empathy, felt like a balm on an old wound, and for a moment, I felt the tiniest bit of relief. But my sister-in-law looked stunned, as if she'd been slapped in the face. She took a step back, her mouth opening and closing like she was searching for something to say. Anything to justify her words. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, processing the fact that I too had experienced the same kind of grief. That I knew all too well the pain of loss. But instead of softening, her face hardened. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" she asked. Her voice laced with accusation. As if my silence was somehow a betrayal. "I mean, how was I supposed to know that you'd been through that?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my tone calm, even though my heart was racing, because I wanted to handle it privately. I said, choosing my words carefully, because it was painful, and because I felt that everyone has their own struggles, and I didn't want mine to weigh on anyone else. "I'm telling you this now because I need you to understand that just because someone doesn't talk about their pain doesn't mean they haven't felt it." She looked away, and I could see her fighting back tears. Her lips pressed tightly together. Part of me felt guilty, like maybe I'd shared too much. Maybe I'd crossed a line. But another part of me, a part I'd been silencing for far too long, felt a sense of relief. Finally, I wasn't just the lucky mom with the perfect family. Finally, someone else understood that my journey hadn't been without its own hardships. The tension in the room was thick, and I could see my husband's conflicted expression, torn between wanting to support his sister and wanting to stand by me. My sister-in-law muttered something about needing a moment and walked out of the room, leaving me standing there, feeling both a sense of release and a nagging guilt that maybe, just maybe, I shouldn't have said anything. But as I held my daughter a little closer, feeling her warmth, her little hand reaching up to touch my face, I realized that my silence had been weighing on me more than I'd known. My sister-in-law needed to know that grief wasn't a competition. That we could all have our own stories of pain without diminishing each other's. I wasn't trying to overshadow her loss or make it about me. I was trying to show her that she wasn't alone. That I knew the heartache she was feeling. Later that night, as my husband and I drove home, he reached over and squeezed my hand. "You did the right thing," he said softly. Maybe it hurt her now, but she needed to hear it. I nodded, unsure if he was right but grateful for his support. In my heart, I knew I couldn't keep hiding my own pain to make others comfortable. Especially when it came to something as profound as loss. Maybe, just maybe, sharing my story could help her heal too. And maybe, in some small way, it could help me find my own peace. The following day, I woke up with a sense of heaviness that I couldn't shake. It was like my heart was weighed down by a mix of guilt, exhaustion, and uncertainty. Part of me felt relieved. I'd finally spoken my truth, let go of the burden I'd carried silently for years. But another part of me couldn't help but replay my sister-in-law's shocked expression. The way her face had tightened when she'd walked out. I'd expected her to feel understood, maybe even comforted, but instead, it seemed like I'd only hurt her more. As I was having my morning coffee, my husband walked in, phone in hand, eyebrows raised. "You're not going to believe this," he said with a slight shake of his head, handing me the phone. It was a message from his sister. She'd sent it to him, not me, and it was long, emotional, and angry. In her message, she accused me of making the conversation all about myself, turning her fresh grief into an opportunity to share my own, as if I was somehow competing with her pain. She said she felt blindsided and betrayed, that I should have kept my struggles to myself, especially given how new her loss was. She didn't mince words either, saying she felt I'd been passive-aggressive, and that my line about everyone has their own struggles felt like a thinly veiled attempt to minimize her loss. Reading her words, I felt my stomach twist with guilt and frustration. Competing? Minimizing her grief? That was the last thing I'd wanted to do. I had shared my story because I thought it might help her feel less alone. Not more isolated. I'd thought it would be a moment of connection, an unspoken understanding that grief doesn't look the same for everyone, that it isn't limited to one person's experience. But she'd seen it as something else entirely. My husband, bless him, was trying to lighten the mood, half smiling as he read the message with me. "She'll come around," he said, giving my shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "It's just raw right now. She's hurting, and she probably didn't expect that you'd been through so much." He laughed a little, saying, "Honestly, if anyone was competing, it'd be her." I couldn't help but give him a small, appreciative smile, but his words didn't settle my nerves. Competing? That wasn't what I'd wanted at all. I was feeling lost, unsure of how my good intentions had been twisted so thoroughly. I had wanted to make her feel seen, not overshadowed, but somehow, I'd done exactly that in her eyes. I kept replaying the dinner, second-guessing every word, every decision to open up about my own experience. Maybe I should have just stayed quiet. Let her believe she was alone in this journey. If that's what would have made her feel better. Later that day, the calls started coming. First, it was my mother-in-law, who was as kind as ever but clearly a bit flustered. She'd spoken to my sister-in-law and wanted to make sure everyone was okay. She didn't say it outright, but I could sense she was trying to play peacemaker, subtly hinting that perhaps I could have picked a better time to share my story. "You know how sensitive she is right now," she said gently, as if I'd somehow forgotten. I assured her that I hadn't meant to hurt anyone, that I'd only shared because it felt like the right time to connect. She listened and murmured something about understanding, but the conversation left me feeling like I'd done something wrong, like I'd overstepped in a way that couldn't be taken back. Then my phone buzzed with a text from a mutual family friend who'd heard about the dinner. "Hey, I heard things got a bit emotional," she said, hinting that my sister-in-law had shared her version of what happened. I felt a surge of frustration. Was this now a public affair? Had she told everyone about my miscarriages? Shared my private grief because I'd shared hers? The realization stung, a betrayal of the very privacy I'd fought so hard to keep. By the end of the day, I felt emotionally wrung out, like I'd been wrangled through some unspoken family court and found guilty of insensitivity. The irony was almost painful. I'd stayed quiet all these years to avoid exactly this. To keep my story from becoming some family tale, something others could dissect, judge, and interpret, but in trying to connect with her, I'd somehow lost control of my own narrative. I spent that evening trying to make sense of my feelings, trying to untangle the web of guilt and hurt that had built up inside me. Part of me wanted to call her, to apologize for sharing when she clearly wasn't ready to hear it. Another part of me felt justified. I had every right to share my own story, especially if it might help her feel less alone. And yet, that same sense of empathy that had led me to speak up was now backfiring, telling me I'd overstepped, that I should have held my silence a little longer. As I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't help but question myself. Was I wrong for sharing? Should I have stayed silent to spare her feelings? It was such a strange feeling, this mix of sorrow and frustration, knowing I'd tried to offer her a piece of my own heart, only to have her reject it. By the time my husband came to bed, I was still wide awake, lost in thought. He sensed my turmoil and wrapped an arm around me, whispering, "You did the right thing. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." I wanted to believe him. I really did, but the guilt wouldn't let go so easily. As I drifted into a restless sleep, I knew that things wouldn't be the same between me and my sister-in-law. At least not for a while. Her grief was fresh, her wounds raw, and maybe I had unknowingly struck a nerve that was too sensitive to handle. But even through the guilt, I held onto a small piece of resolve. I wouldn't apologize for sharing my truth, for letting her know that she wasn't the only one to carry the weight of loss. I just wished she could see that my story wasn't meant to diminish hers, but to remind her that we were both walking through the same storm, even if our paths looked a little different. The days that followed were quiet, though a strange sort of tension hung in the air, like everyone in the family was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. My sister-in-law and I didn't speak, and even the usual family group chat fell silent. It was as if we were all circling around this awkward gap, not sure how to bridge it or if it should even be bridged. I tried to distract myself, pouring my energy into my work, my daughter, anything that would keep my mind off the sinking feeling that I'd lost something important. Yet, each time I'd pause, there it was, gnawing at me, the guilt, the sense of betrayal, the lingering question of whether I'd done the right thing. Every time I thought back to my sister-in-law's hurt, the rawness in her face, I wondered if my timing had been completely wrong, if I should have just let her feel her pain alone. One evening, as I was tucking my daughter into bed, she looked up at me with those big, innocent eyes, and I felt an overwhelming wave of gratitude. She was here, safe and healthy, her tiny fingers clutching mine, and I was a mother because I'd fought for her through years of heartbreak. And yet, I knew my sister-in-law longed for exactly this, to feel the small weight of a child in her arms, to share these quiet, precious moments. For the first time since the dinner, I understood why my presence, why my daughter's presence, had been such a painful reminder for her. She'd had that dream within her grasp, only to have it slip away. That understanding didn't erase my own pain or the struggles I'd faced to reach this point, but it did soften something inside me. I could finally see that my sister-in-law's reaction hadn't been about competing grief or trying to diminish my losses. It had simply been about her own ache, her own desperation to be understood, even if she couldn't see past her own pain to understand mine. With that thought came a sense of clarity. I realized that grief has a way of making us both vulnerable and defensive, leaving us raw and exposed, clinging to whatever we think will help us hold on. I'd thought sharing my story might bridge the gap between us, but maybe my sister-in-law had needed that space to grieve alone, just as I'd once needed silence. I hadn't been wrong to share, but I could understand now why it had felt like a burden to her instead of a comfort. A few days later, I decided to reach out, hoping to extend an olive branch without pressuring her to respond. I kept my message simple, choosing my words carefully. "Hey, I just wanted to check in. I know things got emotional at dinner, and I want you to know that I didn't mean to take away from your pain. I just thought sharing might help us feel less alone, but I understand if it felt like too much. I'm here whenever you want to talk or need anything." I stared at the screen for a long time before finally pressing send, feeling both a sense of release and a nervous anticipation. I didn't know if she'd respond or if this message would go unanswered. All I knew was that I needed to extend grace, to offer her a way to know I wasn't angry or hurt by her reaction, even if it had stung. The next day, she replied. Her message was short, almost hesitant, but it was there. "Thank you. I'm sorry, too. I think I just wasn't ready. It's still really hard for me to see other people so happy, but I know it wasn't fair of me to say what I did." There it was, the bridge I'd hoped we could build. She didn't offer much, didn't elaborate, but that simple acknowledgement felt like enough. I sat back, rereading her message, feeling a weight lift that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. It wasn't a full resolution. I didn't expect us to talk openly about my losses or hers anytime soon. But it was a step, a small understanding that grief had taken us both down different roads and that we could still meet somewhere in the middle, even if we couldn't walk the exact same path. As the weeks went on, things gradually returned to normal. Family gatherings resumed, and while my sister-in-law and I didn't talk about our experiences again, there was a quiet, mutual respect between us. We'd both been through something painful, something that had left scars. And even if we hadn't processed it in the same way, we'd managed to find a place of empathy, a shared understanding that our grief was valid in its own right. One evening, as we sat together at another family dinner, she looked over at me and gave a small, almost shy smile. It wasn't much, but it was a silent acknowledgement, a reminder that healing takes time and that sometimes, the best way to support each other is simply by being there. Even in silence. In the end, I found a sense of peace with my choice. I'd spoken my truth, yes, but I'd also given her the space to feel hers. I'd learned that while grief can divide us, it can also be the very thing that teaches us compassion, that reminds us to tread carefully, to give others room to heal in their own way. And I knew, deep down, that I could honor both my own journey and hers, even if it meant letting go of the need to be understood. For now, that was enough. In the weeks and months that followed, I felt a shift within myself, a quiet but significant change. I'd come to see that my journey through grief and loss, though painful and marked by moments of silence, had made me stronger in ways I hadn't fully understood until now. I'd been tested, not just in my own pain but in the compassion I could extend to others. Even when it came at a cost to me, family gatherings became a little easier each time, and though my sister-in-law and I hadn't spoken again about that night, there was a renewed understanding between us. I could see the way she looked at my daughter now, a softer, gentler gaze, and she'd even started to join in on the occasional game of peek-a-boo or make silly faces at her from across the table. Those moments felt like small victories, signs that maybe we were both finding our way through the heartache, allowing room for joy again without feeling guilty. One afternoon, while my husband and I were cleaning up after a family barbecue, my mother-in-law pulled me aside. Her expression was thoughtful, a mixture of concern and warmth, and she gently placed her hand on my shoulder. "I wanted to thank you," she said quietly, "for everything, for being so understanding with her, even when it wasn't easy." She looked at me as if she finally saw the layers of resilience beneath the surface. The parts of myself I'd tried so hard to protect and keep hidden. I simply nodded, offering a small smile. There was no need to explain further. I'd come to realize that family wasn't always about shared experiences or unspoken expectations. Sometimes, it was about learning to love each other through our differences, accepting that we all carried invisible weights, and knowing that we could still show up for each other in the end. Over time, I let go of any lingering need for validation. I didn't need my sister-in-law to fully understand my journey. Nor did I need to be the one who fixed her pain. She had her own path to walk, just as I had mine. All I could do was hope that, in my own small way, I'd helped her feel less alone, even if our grief had, at times, felt like a gulf between us. And as for myself, I realized that I'd given myself something precious. Too, permission to speak, to let my truth be heard even when it was hard. For years, I'd thought that my silence protected me, that by keeping my losses private, I could somehow hold them without letting them define me. But now, I understood that speaking up had been a way to honor those experiences, to acknowledge the strength it had taken to get through them. I hadn't diminished my sister-in-law's grief, I'd simply allowed space for my own. And in doing so, I'd found a way to carry it with me without shame. There was a night, some time later, when my husband and I were putting our daughter to bed. She was in that half-asleep state, her tiny hand clutching my finger as she drifted off, and I felt a deep sense of gratitude wash over me. This little girl, this beautiful miracle, was here because I'd held on, through all the heartbreak and setbacks, through every moment I doubted it was possible. And now, as she lay nestled in her crib, I knew that my story was one of resilience, of finding peace even in the most difficult moments. Eventually, I wrote a letter to myself, one I didn't intend to share, but one that helped me put everything into perspective. I wrote about the years of loss, the moments of despair, and the quiet strength I found in finally becoming a mother. I wrote about my sister-in-law, her pain, her struggles, and the compassion I'd learned to extend not just to her but to myself. I wrote about how loss doesn't make us lesser or unworthy, but rather, it shapes us, softens us, and, if we let it, makes us kinder, more understanding. The family dynamic continued to shift in subtle ways. My sister-in-law and I grew closer, bit by bit, though we never explicitly revisited that night. It was as if we both knew, in our own ways, that the past had been painful but necessary, a step towards something deeper, a place where we could coexist in love and understanding without needing to compare or compete. She didn't ask about my miscarriages, and I didn't push her to talk about her pain. We simply allowed each other to heal in our own time, holding space for one another. I'd come to realize that my family's acceptance of my journey didn't need to look like perfect understanding. It looked like my mother-in-law's grateful nods, my husband's quiet support, my sister-in-law's small, gentle smiles across the table, and in that, I'd found peace, a peace that no one could take from me, because it came from my own decision to honor my truth and let it be enough. As the months turned into years, I watched my daughter grow, my heart swelling with pride and love, and I thought about all the strength it had taken to bring her into this world. I didn't have to carry my story alone anymore, and I didn't have to make anyone else understand it completely. It was mine, and I'd come to see that sharing it didn't make it any less precious. In the end, I realized that forgiveness, of myself, of my sister-in-law, and even of the pain we'd both endured, had given me something I never expected. I'd found a new kind of strength, one that allowed me to hold space for others without diminishing my own experiences. One that made me feel whole even in the presence of scars. And as I looked around the family table one evening, seeing the people I loved and knowing the quiet journeys each of us had taken, I knew one thing for certain: I was exactly where I was meant to be. With exactly the people I was meant to share this life with.
AITA for leaving my sister's kid with a family friend after she was hours late picking him up? I was actually looking forward to the weekend with my nephew. It wasn't often I got to spend one-on-one time with him. And I thought it'd be a good chance to catch up, have some fun, and make his mom's life a bit easier. I don't have kids myself, so these weekends let me be the fun uncle, the one who does cool stuff. The one who doesn't have to enforce bedtimes or make sure vegetables get eaten at dinner. That's a nice spot to be in, really. When my sister asked me to watch him, she'd been clear: she'd drop him off Friday night, then be back to pick him up early Saturday morning. I'll be there before you know it, she'd said, adding a little laugh, like she knew she'd be racing back for him right at dawn. I didn't think much of it. It sounded like she'd be gone no more than a few hours past breakfast. I'm usually an early riser, so it felt like an easy ask. So, Friday night, I stocked up on everything a kid could want: chips, cookies, a couple of frozen pizzas. I even picked up a new board game and rented a couple of movies I thought he might like. The way I saw it, I'd show him a good time. Then by morning, hand him back off to his mom, with plenty of stories for him to tell. And I was happy to help. Really, I was. My sister is a single mom, and I know she has her hands full. Between work and school events, her life seems like a constant game of Tetris, moving pieces around to fit everything in place. I know this was a night she'd been looking forward to, a chance to relax, have a little fun with her friends, and leave her responsibilities behind for once. I can only imagine how much she needed it, and I wanted to be there for her, as any good brother would. When they got to my place, my nephew looked like he was ready to burst with excitement. He's 8, and at that age where everything new feels like an adventure. "Can we have pizza?" he asked, his eyes already drifting toward the kitchen. "You bet," I said, ruffling his hair. I got a couple of them ready to go. And, as soon as my sister left, we dove right in: pizza, games, and all the sugar he could handle. By the time the night wrapped up, we'd made a pretty good dent in the snacks, watched way too much TV, and tried our best at the board game I'd bought, which he absolutely smoked me at, by the way. When it was time for bed, he looked wiped out, and I tucked him in with promises of pancakes for breakfast. Everything felt easy, natural. I felt like I'd stepped into this little bubble of time where I didn't have to think about work, errands, or any of the usual stuff. It was just me and my nephew. And that was enough. I hadn't been this relaxed in a while. And it felt good. The next morning, I got up early, as usual, brewed a pot of coffee, and whipped up the pancake batter. I figured my sister would be here soon enough, but I wanted to make sure her son got breakfast. I could picture it all already. My sister would walk in, look exhausted but happy, and maybe we'd even share a cup of coffee before they headed out. I'd get a quiet day to myself, go to my friend's party in the afternoon, and the weekend would wrap up in the relaxed, simple way I planned. But when the pancakes were done, and my nephew was halfway through his plate, I checked my phone and noticed she hadn't texted yet. Odd. Usually, she'd send me something as soon as she was on her way. So, I sent her a quick message: "Hey, are you on the way?" Simple, casual, nothing too pressing. She texted back right away: "On my way." I felt a little relieved. Figured maybe she'd had a late night and was just moving slowly. No big deal. But as we finished breakfast and moved on to hanging out around the apartment, I kept an eye on the clock. It was creeping past 9, then 10, and still, no sign of her. So, there we were, morning dragging on, my nephew and I hanging out, waiting for my sister to show. Honestly, I was trying not to get annoyed. I'd started off the day in a good mood, thinking I'd be handing him over soon and could ease into my Saturday. But by 10, I was starting to wonder if "on my way" actually meant anything to her. Maybe she just needed a bit more time. No harm, I told myself. She's probably grabbing a coffee or something. But an hour later, I'm staring at the clock, realizing how late it's getting. I know she doesn't have to be anywhere this morning, but I do. I've got plans at 3. And I didn't want to rush or risk showing up late to the one thing I'd been looking forward to all week. By 11, I sent her another text: "Hey, just checking in. I've got plans later." So trying to figure out timing. It was my way of saying, "Hey, let's wrap this up." Still, I kept it light, thinking maybe she'd understand and pick up the pace. This time, her response came back after a few minutes: "Be there soon." Short and sweet, but it didn't exactly fill me with confidence. Soon? What does that even mean? 10 minutes? An hour? I wanted to believe it'd be within the next half hour. Maybe by noon, but part of me already sensed this wasn't going to be that simple. I mean, soon is one of those words people throw around when they're buying themselves time. I could feel my frustration simmering. But, for my nephew's sake, I tried to keep it together. It's not like he had any idea his mom was late, and the last thing I wanted was for him to feel uncomfortable. So, I took a breath and shifted my focus back to him. We decided to get out of the house for a bit and headed to the nearby park. I watched him running around, climbing the jungle gym, his little face lighting up every time he'd slide down. I kept checking my phone every few minutes, expecting to see a text from my sister, saying she was on the way for real this time. But nothing, just the same silence as the clock ticked closer to noon. Back at my place, we had lunch, which I hadn't originally planned for. But what else was I supposed to do? I mean, the kid was getting hungry, and I couldn't let him wait until who knows when for his mom to come back. As I made him a sandwich, I felt that mix of frustration and confusion building up again. I didn't mind taking care of him for a bit longer, but it was the not knowing that got to me. All I wanted was a straight answer from her, a clear time. A little reassurance she'd be there soon. So, as we sat down to eat, I texted her again, this time with a bit more urgency. Hey, just want to confirm what time you'll be here. I need to leave by 3. It wasn't rude, wasn't over the top, but it was clear enough. I was starting to think she might not have thought through that I had a life, too, and that I'd only signed up for an overnight babysitting gig, not an open-ended commitment. But then, nothing, no reply, just radio silence. At this point, I started feeling that mix of frustration and worry, you know, when you're not sure if you should be mad or concerned. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but it crossed my mind that maybe something had come up. Maybe she was tied up with some emergency. But, come on, if that was the case, she could have just sent a quick text or called. Anything. Instead, I was left in limbo, glancing at the clock every 5 minutes, hoping she'd show up any second. So, morning rolls around, and I'm ready. I figured my sister would be knocking by 8, maybe 9 at the latest. I was up early as usual, got coffee brewing, and whipped up a stack of pancakes with all the toppings I knew my nephew loved. I'd promised him a good breakfast, and the look on his face when he saw the pancakes was worth every bit of effort. But as we ate and I glanced at the clock, I realized it was creeping closer to 9, and no sign of my sister. It's funny how quickly little delays can go from being a non-issue to being a bit irritating. At first, I was relaxed, no big deal, figuring she was just taking her time. She'd had a rare night off, probably stayed up late catching up with friends. Good for her. So, I sent her a quick text around 9, saying, "Hey, are you on your way?" Almost right away, she replied, "On my way." That was all she said, but it seemed clear enough, so I didn't think much of it. I topped off my coffee and tried to brush off that creeping sense of impatience. I figured she'd show up soon. After all, she'd asked to pick him up early in the morning, which seemed pretty straightforward. But as we went through breakfast and started our usual games and hangout time, the minutes just kept ticking by. 10 o'clock, then 10:30, still no knock on the door. At first, my nephew didn't notice anything strange. He was absorbed in his little world of board games and cartoons, just happy to have the morning with his cool uncle. But I couldn't shake the feeling of irritation building up. I didn't want to let it show, though no reason he needed to feel my frustration. As it crept toward 11, I texted her again. I tried to keep it casual, just a gentle reminder. Still good for today? Just wanted to check in since I've got some plans this afternoon. Part of me hoped she'd respond with something concrete, like, "I'll be there in half an hour," or, "Be there by noon at the latest." But instead, she just replied, "Be there soon." Soon, a vague little word that, somehow, left me feeling even more on edge. I wanted to be patient. She's my sister, and she's got a full plate. I know that better than anyone. But the plans I'd made for the afternoon were ones I'd been looking forward to for a while. They were my little break after a busy week, my own time to unwind and catch up with friends. And the more I watched the clock, the more it felt like my Saturday was slipping away, minute by minute. So, I kept trying to distract myself. I played another game with my nephew, put on a movie, even thought about heading out to the park if she didn't show soon. But it was hard to fully enjoy anything when I was constantly checking my phone, waiting for the sound of her text notification, wondering when she'd actually show up. I could feel that pit of frustration growing in my stomach, but I tried to keep a lid on it. I didn't want to seem irritated in front of my nephew, who was still oblivious to any sort of delay. As 11 turned into noon, though, I started thinking ahead to my own plans. I'd promised my friends I'd be at the party by 3, which was still plenty of time if she came by noon, or even a little after. But the more time passed without a knock on the door or a proper response from her, the more I wondered how much longer I'd be sitting here, waiting for a soon. That didn't seem to mean anything. I felt torn. I wanted to be a good brother, to help her out and give her the break she clearly needed. But I also wanted to be respected enough to not be left hanging. It wasn't just about my plans, it was about feeling like my time mattered too. Like she appreciated the effort I was making. But there I was, stuck in this limbo, not sure how to handle the mounting frustration without creating some sort of tension between us. By then, my nephew had finished his second movie and was starting to get antsy, asking when his mom would be there. "Soon, buddy," I said, with a smile I hoped was more convincing than I felt. But internally, I was already wondering if maybe soon meant something different to her than it did to me. And deep down, I had a nagging feeling that I wasn't going to make it to my plans on time, even if I wanted to. By the time noon came and went, I was definitely more than irritated. I'd sent 2 texts. I tried to keep things easy going, and yet here I was, still hanging around with my nephew, with no idea when she'd actually show up. I looked over at him as he played with some of his toys, feeling this growing mix of frustration and, honestly, anxiety. I was happy to spend more time with him. I loved the kid. But this was starting to feel less like a quick favor and more like, well, like I'd been taken for granted. At 12:30, I texted her again, this time a little more direct. I've got plans later. Need to leave by 3. Are you still on the way? It was clear but not rude. I figured she might finally give me a real answer if she saw that I was pressed for time. But nothing. No text, no call, just silence. I tried calling her at 1 o'clock, figuring maybe she was just too busy to check her messages. But her phone rang and then went straight to voicemail. So, I left a message, trying to keep calm. Hey, just wanted to check in. Still need to know what time you'll be here. Let me know, please. At this point, I was running out of patience. Meanwhile, my nephew started to notice that something was up. Is mom coming soon? He asked, looking up at me with these wide, curious eyes. I told him, she's on her way, hoping it wasn't a complete lie. But deep down, I was feeling this awful mix of frustration and worry. If something had come up, she could have just told me. Instead, I was left scrambling, trying to keep him entertained and wondering if I'd have to cancel my own plans just to cover for her. It was nearly 2 o'clock, and I was feeling a serious sense of dread creeping in. I knew that if I wanted to make it to my friend's gathering by 3, I need to start getting ready soon. But here I was, no closer to a solution, no closer to hearing from my sister. It felt like she'd just vanished into thin air. I started considering all my options, racking my brain for how to manage this without losing my cool. Finally, around 2:30, I realized I couldn't keep waiting. I couldn't just sit around and watch my plans dissolve while my sister stayed silent. I decided I'd reach out to a family friend who lives in my building, a woman named Carol who's known my family for years and is practically like an aunt to us. My nephew knows her well, and I was pretty sure he'd feel safe and comfortable with her. She'd watched him a few times before, so it wasn't like I was leaving him with a stranger. And really, it felt like my only option. So, I called Carol, explained the situation, and she agreed to help without a second thought. She didn't ask why my sister hadn't shown up or why I was so pressed for time, she just said, bring him over. I felt a wave of relief knowing there was at least a solution. That I wouldn't be stuck endlessly waiting. I packed up a few of his things, told him we were going to see Carol for a bit, and headed over to her apartment. He seemed fine with it, even excited, since he knew Carol had a dog he loved playing with. As I left him there, I texted my sister one last time, letting her know exactly where her son was and explaining that I couldn't wait any longer. I'd done my best, I told myself. I'd gone above and beyond, and now it was on her to follow through. Heading out to my friend's place, though, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were going to get messy. I knew my sister wouldn't be thrilled when she found out I hadn't waited. But I couldn't help thinking, if she'd only communicated, if she'd only respected my time a little bit, none of this would have been necessary. By 2:30, the anxiety was hitting hard. I was stuck between this nagging worry that maybe something serious had happened to my sister and the cold reality that I was about to miss my own plans because of her lack of communication. I kept pacing around, checking my phone every few seconds, hoping for any kind of update. But every time I looked, it was just silence, not a single response from her. At this point, I was running through every scenario in my head. Was she okay? Did she forget? Was this some kind of power move? Or was she just assuming I'd cancel my plans without a second thought? I hated to think that she'd actually just blow me off like that. But with every passing minute, that possibility seemed more and more likely. And honestly, it stung. I was more than willing to help her out. But this had gone beyond helping. It felt like she was taking advantage of me. I tried calling her again, my heart pounding as I listened to the phone ring, only for it to go to voicemail once more. I left a message, struggling to keep my tone steady. Hey, I really need to know what's going on. I'm leaving for my plans soon, so please let me know if you're on your way. I put my phone down and took a deep breath, feeling both annoyed and helpless. I didn't know if she'd even get the message, but it was all I could do at this point. Then it hit me. I'd done everything I could. I'd waited, reached out, even adjusted my own plans to try and accommodate her. But now I was looking at the very real possibility of just missing out altogether. And for what? So she could avoid a few texts or ignore my calls? I felt that flicker of frustration start to turn into something stronger. Something bordering on resentment. It wasn't just about the inconvenience anymore. It was about respect. I'd agreed to help her, trusted her to follow through with her promise to pick up her son early the next day. That's the kind of arrangement that only works when both sides keep up their end of the deal. And here I was, left hanging, my entire day thrown off because she couldn't take 2 seconds to let me know what was going on. I glanced over at my nephew, who was sitting on the couch, happily absorbed in a game on his tablet, blissfully unaware of any of the stress swirling around. He'd been easygoing all day. No complaints, no fuss, just happy to be spending time with me. And as much as I loved having him here, I couldn't ignore the fact that I was running out of options. Finally, I knew what I had to do. I took a deep breath and reached out to Carol, the family friend I knew I could trust. She was someone my nephew knew well, someone who'd known my family for years. And honestly, at this point, she was my only choice if I was going to get to my plans at all. I explained the situation, and she didn't hesitate to say yes. I felt a mix of relief and guilt wash over me as I realized I was passing the responsibility to someone else. But I didn't know what else to do. My sister hadn't left me any choice. I told my nephew we'd be going to see Carol for a bit. And he just shrugged, happy as ever, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. We headed down the hall, and Carol welcomed him with a warm smile, giving me a reassuring nod. I told her I'd text my sister, explaining everything, and left my nephew in her capable hands. After sending one final text to my sister, explaining that her son was with Carol, I grabbed my keys and headed out the door. But as I drove away, the knot in my stomach only tightened. I kept replaying the whole thing in my head, questioning if I'd made the right call, wondering how my sister would react when she finally saw my messages. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I'd done everything I could, but I knew deep down this wasn't over. I'd made my choice, but something told me it was going to cost me. When I left my nephew with Carol, a part of me finally exhaled. She greeted us warmly, pulling my nephew into a hug and welcoming him with that familiar, easygoing warmth that only someone who's practically family can bring. Carol was a safe place for him, and I knew he'd be fine. He even lit up when he saw her dog, a big fluffy retriever he adored. So while I was still anxious about the situation, seeing him settle in eased a bit of my worry. I explained the situation to Carol as best I could without venting my own frustration. She was supposed to pick him up this morning, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but I haven't been able to reach her, and I have plans I really can't miss. Carol just nodded, understanding immediately. She's known my sister and me since we were kids, so she probably didn't need much explanation. But she did give me that look, the one that said she understood there was more going on. That I'd probably been waiting longer than I'd let on. She patted my arm and said, "Don't worry, he's in good hands. Go do what you need to do." I thanked her, feeling a mix of relief and lingering guilt, as I walked out of her apartment and headed toward my car. I pulled out my phone one last time. I opened up the text thread with my sister and sent one final message. "Hey, I had to leave for my plans. Nephew's name is with Carol, and she has all your contact info. Let me know if there's anything you need." I stared at that message for a minute, wondering if it sounded too blunt or too frustrated. But at this point, I didn't have the energy to find the perfect words. I was spent, emotionally, mentally, and honestly, I was just over it. I'd done everything I could to make this work, waited for hours, made extra arrangements. Now it was up to her to follow through. But as I drove off, that sense of relief didn't last long. Instead, I started to feel the full weight of guilt creeping in, like I'd done something wrong. It's strange, I felt completely justified while I was still at home, watching the clock and feeling every second tick by without a word from her. But now that I was finally free to head to my plans, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, I'd overstepped. I tried to reason with myself. I'd left him with someone safe, someone he knew well. He wasn't in any danger, wasn't abandoned. I'd done everything responsibly. But that voice in the back of my mind kept nagging, whispering that I'd given up on my sister when she needed me, that I could have waited just a little longer, that maybe this wasn't as big a deal as I'd made it out to be. I wasn't someone who left family hanging. But today, I had. As I pulled into the driveway of my friend's house, I tried to shove those thoughts aside. I hadn't seen these friends in months, and I'd been looking forward to this gathering all week. But even as I walked up to the front door, greeting my friends and trying to get into the spirit of things, my mind kept drifting back to my sister, to the moment she'd find out I'd left her son with Carol instead of waiting like she'd expected. Halfway through the party, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my sister. She'd finally gotten my messages, and her response was exactly what I'd feared. "Are you kidding me? You just left him with someone else? You had one job. I can't believe you'd abandon him like that." I felt my face flush, my heart thudding as I read her words. Abandoned him. That word felt like a punch to the gut. I hadn't abandoned him. I'd done everything I could to make sure he was safe and comfortable. But her anger, her disappointment, it was clear she didn't see it that way. To her, I'd broken a trust, left her child with someone else just to go to a social event. I knew I had two choices. I could fire back, explain the whole day from my perspective, let her know just how much I bent over backward to accommodate her lack of communication. Or, I could let it go for now, give her time to cool down, and try to work things out later. I was tempted to go with the first option, to tell her exactly how inconsiderate she'd been, but something held me back. Maybe it was the guilt, or maybe it was that nagging reminder that family didn't deserve that kind of bitterness. So, I texted back simply, "He was safe with Carol. I waited all day, and I needed to leave. We can talk about it when you're ready." As I pressed send, I felt a small wave of regret. Part of me wanted to explain everything, to justify my actions so she'd understand that I hadn't taken this lightly. But another part of me knew that right now, it wouldn't make a difference. She was angry, and maybe she had a right to be. Or maybe she didn't. Either way, I'd chosen to leave, and now I had to stand by it. I spent the rest of the gathering with my friends, but I couldn't fully enjoy it. My sister's message, her anger, kept replaying in my head. I kept wondering if I'd messed things up, if I'd turned what should have been a simple family favor into something messy and complicated. I tried to reassure myself that I'd made the right call, that I'd done what anyone else would do under the circumstances. But there's a difference between being technically right and feeling right in your gut. Later that evening, as I headed back home, I felt exhausted. I didn't know what my sister would say next, or if she'd be willing to listen when I tried to explain. All I knew was that family has a way of getting under your skin, making things complicated even when you think you're doing everything by the book. Maybe I'd done the right thing. Maybe I hadn't. Either way, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. And it was going to take more than a text message to fix it. The next day, I woke up to a stream of messages from my sister. She'd clearly had time to stew on the situation, and she didn't hold back. Her texts were long, full of accusations, and each message hit harder than the last. I can't believe you would just leave him with someone else without waiting for me. One text read, "You had one job, and you couldn't even do that. You're his uncle. Do you even care about him at all?" That last part, "Do you even care about him at all?" made my stomach drop. How could she even think that? I'd bent over backward trying to work around her delays, tried everything to get in touch, and even arranged for someone he knew and loved to watch him when I had to leave. But to her, it wasn't enough. I was furious, but a part of me also felt deflated, like maybe she'd never really understand the effort I'd put in or the impossible situation she'd put me in. I tried to take a few deep breaths, to calm down before responding. The last thing I wanted was to add fuel to the fire. Especially since she was clearly so emotional. I knew she cared deeply about her son, and maybe she felt guilty for not showing up on time and was turning that guilt on me. Still, I felt like I had to defend myself, at least a little, so I typed a response, trying to keep my tone steady, calm, and clear. I waited for hours, called, texted, and tried everything I could to reach you. I didn't just leave him with anyone, I left him with Carol. Someone we've both trusted for years. I had no choice. You can't expect me to put my whole day on hold indefinitely without any communication from you. I hit send, feeling a mix of relief and dread. I wasn't sure how she'd take it, but I knew I had to stand up for myself. I could feel my frustration simmering. This wasn't about me not caring. This was about her lack of respect for my time and the position she'd put me in. And yet, in her eyes, I'd somehow betrayed her trust. Her response came almost immediately. "Family should come first, no matter what. I've always been there for you when you needed me, and I thought you'd do the same. Instead, you dumped him on someone else so you could go have fun. That's just selfish." Selfish. The word stung, especially because I'd spent the entire day trying to balance my own plans with my responsibility to help her. And here she was, acting as if I'd simply abandoned her son on a whim. I started typing back a response. Something about how she hadn't even considered that I might have responsibilities too. How her constant delays had made it impossible to stick to any plan. But I stopped myself. No matter what I said, she was in full defensive mode, and I knew I wasn't going to get through to her. Instead, I put down my phone, trying to gather my thoughts. Her accusations swirled in my head, her words echoing in that part of my brain that kept wondering if I really had been too harsh. If maybe I could have just waited a little longer. But deep down, I knew that wasn't fair to me. I'd done more than most people would have, and her failure to communicate wasn't my fault. Later that afternoon, my mom called, and it didn't take long to realize she'd already heard about the situation. She didn't sound accusatory, but I could tell she was calling to try and smooth things over. "Honey, I know your sister can be a little disorganized," she said, gently. "But she's going through a lot. She really counted on you to be there for her this weekend. You know how much she leans on you." I felt the frustration rising again, but I kept it in check. "Mom, I was there for her. I watched him overnight, fed him breakfast, lunch, tried to keep him busy." But she was hours late without a single clear answer. She just left me hanging. My mom sighed. I know, she should have communicated better. But you know how family is, sometimes. They just need you to be patient. Even if it's frustrating, maybe you two just need to sit down and talk it out." Sit down and talk it out. Easy for her to say. She wasn't the one who'd waited all day. But I knew she was right in a way. My sister and I were close, despite moments like this, and I didn't want one incident to ruin that. But a part of me also felt that if we didn't address this, if I didn't stand up for my own time and boundaries, this sort of thing would just keep happening. After a few minutes, I thanked my mom for calling, assured her that I'd figure things out, and hung up. I could tell she meant well. But I also knew this wasn't something that would just go away with a simple, talk it out. Finally, that evening, I decided to send one last text to my sister. I kept it brief, but I tried to convey both my frustration and my willingness to work through things with her. "I'm sorry you feel hurt. I never wanted to let you down. And I would have done anything to make sure nephew's name was safe. But it's not fair to expect me to put my whole day on hold without any communication. We can talk more whenever you're ready. Then I left it at that. I knew she probably wouldn't respond right away. Maybe not even that week. And as much as I felt bad for the way things had gone down, I also felt a sense of peace with my decision. I'd done what I could. I'd set my boundary. Now, it was on her to decide if she could see my side of things. The next morning, I woke up to a single response from her. It was short, almost reluctant, but it was there. Okay, I'll call you sometime this week. I took a deep breath, feeling both relieved and cautious. There was still tension to sort out, still frustration on both sides. But maybe, just maybe, this was a first step toward understanding each other's perspectives. Family, I reminded myself, wasn't always easy, but sometimes, the difficult conversations were the only way to make sure we weren't just leaning on each other but respecting each other too. The week drifted by slowly, and I didn't hear from my sister. I tried not to dwell on it, kept myself busy with work and errands. But her last text, "I'll call you sometime this week," kept playing on repeat in my head. I wasn't sure what I'd say when she called, or if she'd even want to hear my side. I only knew that we couldn't just let this incident sit between us like a wedge. Unspoken and unresolved. Finally, on Friday evening, my phone buzzed with her name on the screen. I took a deep breath before answering, reminding myself to keep calm. "Hey," I said, trying to sound neutral. There was a pause on the other end before she spoke. "Hey," she said, her voice softer than usual, almost hesitant. I wanted to talk about what happened. I settled into my chair, trying to find my words carefully. "Yeah, I'm glad you called. I've been thinking a lot about it too." She let out a small sigh. "Look, I know I was late, and I'm sorry for that. I really am. I didn't mean to leave you hanging." Her voice cracked a little, and I could tell this was hard for her to say. "It's just, I don't know. Sometimes, I feel like I'm barely holding things together. And when you left him with Carol, it just felt like maybe I'd messed up so badly that even you didn't want to help anymore." Her words caught me off guard. I hadn't realized she'd felt that way, that she thought I'd given up on her. "It wasn't that, not at all," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I left him with Carol because I had no other choice. I needed to go, and I couldn't keep waiting without hearing from you. I was worried too, you know?" She was quiet for a moment. "I guess, I just didn't think about how it would feel from your end. I was so wrapped up in everything going on with me that I didn't even think about how long I was making you wait. And then, when I got your texts, I felt embarrassed, like I'd let you down." I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "I get it, you've got a lot on your plate, and I wanted to be there for you. But I just wish you'd communicated a little more. I mean, I was fine to watch him all morning, but once it got into the afternoon, I felt like I was just sitting in the dark. I didn't know if I'd end up having to cancel my plans, or if you'd even show up by the end of the day." She took a shaky breath. "You're right, I should have been clearer. I know I've been leaning on you a lot lately, and I guess I just assumed you'd be fine with it. I didn't mean to take advantage of you." Hearing her say that helped, more than I'd expected. It's not that I mind helping, really, but I think I just need a little more respect for my time. We both have lives, and I don't want you to feel like you can't rely on me. But I also need us to communicate. That's all." She was quiet for a beat, and then she said, "I understand, and I'm sorry. Really, I don't want you to feel like I don't appreciate what you do. I think I just get so caught up that I forget you've got your own stuff going on too." We fell into a silence, but this one didn't feel as heavy as the others had. It was more like a mutual pause, a place where we could both reflect on how we'd gotten here without feeling like we had to blame each other. After a while, she spoke again. "I know I can't change what happened, but I'll do better, I promise. And, thank you for sticking around, even when I wasn't being fair." I let out a small, relieved laugh. "You're my sister. I'm always going to be here for you. But let's try to keep things a little smoother next time." Yeah, she said, a small laugh in her voice too. "Next time, I'll be on time, I swear." The weight that had been pressing down on me all week finally began to lift. I knew things wouldn't be perfect from here on out, but at least we'd put the hard stuff on the table. At least we'd found a way back to understanding. That night, as I sat alone with my thoughts, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in days. Family wasn't perfect, and we weren't always going to see eye to eye. But sometimes, those hard conversations were what made us stronger, what allowed us to understand each other better. I knew now that she didn't see me as a backup plan or an obligation. She saw me as someone she could trust. And while we both had work to do, it felt good to know that trust hadn't been broken, just tested. In the end, I'd chosen to help, even when it meant setting boundaries. And maybe that's what family is, showing up, being honest, and finding a way to forgive each other, even when things get messy.